The blood would not stop coming. And Nora Brighton knew with a terrible certainty that she was watching a woman die on a winter night in 1878, when the wind howled through the mountains like a living thing bent on destruction. She pressed harder against the hemorrhaging that followed the birth, her hands slick and warm, her mind racing through every technique she had learned in 3 years of delivering babies across the rough territory of Northern California. The mother, a young woman named Sarah Whitfield, had labored for 18 hours in this crude cabin 5 miles outside Calistoga, California, and now lay pale as moonlight on sheets stained crimson. The baby, a tiny girl with a surprisingly strong cry, had been handed to Sarah's frightened husband, who stood in the corner looking helpless. "More towels," Nora said sharply. And Thomas Whitfield stumbled to obey, his hands shaking as he grabbed what little clean fabric remained. She was 22 years old and had seen difficult births before, but nothing like this. The bleeding was relentless, and Sarah's skin grew colder by the minute, despite the fire roaring in the stone hearth. An hour passed, then another. Nora worked with desperate efficiency, trying every method she knew. But the blood kept flowing and Sarah's breathing grew shallow. Thomas hovered nearby, holding his daughter and praying aloud, his voice cracking. Finally, as dawn began to break gray and cold through the single window, Nora sat back on her heels and felt defeat settle over her like a shroud. She looked at Thomas, at the hope dying in his eyes as he read her expression. And she knew what she had to say. "I need to ride to town," she said quietly. "There is a doctor there who might know something I do not. Someone needs to stay with her." "I cannot leave her," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Please, is there anyone else who could go?" Nora thought of the isolation of this place, the nearest neighbor more than a mile away. "I will go myself. Keep her warm. Keep talking to her. I will return as quickly as I can." She was pulling on her heavy wool coat when the door burst open and a man filled the frame, so large and solid he seemed to block out what little morning light there was. Snow swirled around him, and for a moment Nora could only stare at this stranger who had appeared like something out of legend. He was well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained against his bearskin coat, his chest broad and powerful beneath it. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tangled with ice and snow, and a thick beard covered his jaw, but it was his eyes that caught her. Gray as storm clouds and startlingly direct. He carried an enormous pack on his back and a rifle slung across one shoulder, and everything about him spoke of raw strength and survival in these brutal mountains. "Heard there was a woman in labor up here," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Brought supplies in case they were needed." Thomas moved forward. "Jack Thompson. Thank God. My wife, she is bleeding, and Miss Brighton says—" "Let me see," the mountain man said. And he moved past Nora with surprising grace for someone so large. He knelt beside Sarah, and Nora watched as those massive hands, scarred and calloused, touched the young woman's forehead with unexpected gentleness. "How long has she been bleeding like this?" he asked, glancing up at Nora. "Since the birth, 2 hours ago," Nora said, moving to stand beside him. "I have tried everything I know. The bleeding will not stop." Jack Thompson looked at Sarah's pale face, then at the baby in Thomas's arms, and something shifted in his expression. He shrugged off his pack and began pulling items from it with practiced efficiency, a collection of herbs and tinctures that made Nora's eyes widen. "My mother was a midwife," he said without looking up. "Learned from the Miwok women who lived in these mountains. She taught me things that might help." "She needs a doctor," Nora said. "I was about to ride to Calistoga. No time for that. She would be gone before you got halfway there." He held up a small leather pouch. "This is yarrow and shepherd's purse, ground together with something the Miwok call soap root. It can stop bleeding when nothing else will." Nora felt a flash of irritation at this stranger, who presumed to know more than she did. But she was also desperate enough to try anything. "What do you need me to do?" What followed was an hour of intense collaboration as Jack mixed his preparations and Nora applied them under his instruction, her hands working in tandem with his. He spoke in that rough, low voice, telling her exactly what to do. And she found herself trusting him despite having just met him. There was something in his certainty, in the way he moved with such confidence, that made her believe he knew what he was doing. Slowly, impossibly, the bleeding began to slow. Sarah's breathing remained weak but steadied, and color began to return to her cheeks in the faintest degree. Nora felt her heart lift with tentative hope. "It is working," she whispered. And Jack nodded. "Keep pressure there. I need to make her something to drink." He moved to the fire and began heating water in a battered pot, adding herbs from his pack with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Nora watched him from the corner of her eye, this massive stranger who had appeared exactly when needed, and wondered who he was and why he had come. When the tea was ready, Jack lifted Sarah with one arm as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest while Nora held the cup to her lips. Sarah drank weakly, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in an hour. "Thomas," she whispered, and her husband was there instantly, tears streaming down his face. "I am here, love. We have a daughter. You are going to be all right." But Sarah's eyes had found Jack, confusion and fear mixing in her gaze at this large stranger holding her. Jack set her down gently and moved back, giving the family space. Nora followed him to the other side of the cabin. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I thought I was going to lose her." Jack shook his head. "You were doing everything right. Sometimes nature needs a push in a different direction, that is all." "Where did you learn all of this?" "Told you. My mother." He looked down at his hands, those enormous scarred hands that had just saved a woman's life. "She died when I was 17, but she made sure I learned everything she knew. Said a man alone in these mountains needed to know how to heal as well as hunt." "You live up here, in the mountains?" "Have a place about 10 miles north. Trap mostly, hunt when I need to. Come down to Calistoga every few months for supplies." He glanced at the window, where dawn was fully breaking now, cold and gray. "Was heading there when I passed someone yesterday who mentioned the Whitfields were expecting. Thought I would check if they needed anything." Nora studied him, this mountain man with his rough exterior and his unexpected knowledge. "You saved her life. She would have died if you had not come." Jack's gray eyes met hers, and she felt something shift in her chest at the intensity in them. "You would have found a way. You have good instincts. Just needed a different set of tools." They spent the rest of the day at the Whitfield cabin, monitoring Sarah's recovery. The bleeding had stopped completely, and though she was weak, it was clear she would survive. Jack showed Nora how to make more of the herbal preparations, walking her through each step with patient detail. "The yarrow has to be dried properly," he said, his large fingers handling the delicate plants with surprising dexterity. "And you grind it fine, like this. Mix it with the shepherd's purse in equal parts." Nora watched, absorbing every word. She had always believed in learning from anyone who had knowledge to share. And this man clearly knew things she did not. "Would you teach me more?" she asked. "About the other herbs and preparations your mother taught you?" Jack paused, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You would want to learn from a mountain man?" "I want to learn from anyone who can help me save lives," Nora said firmly. "I do not care where the knowledge comes from." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "All right then. I will be in Calistoga for the next week or so. If you are there, I can show you some things." By evening, Sarah was strong enough to hold her baby and nurse her, and Thomas was weeping with relief and gratitude. He tried to pay both Nora and Jack, but Nora waved him off as she always did with families who had little. And Jack simply shook his head. "Just take care of your family," Jack said. "That is payment enough." The snow had stopped, and the sky was clearing to reveal stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Nora packed her medical bag, while Jack readied his own gear. And she realized with some surprise that she was reluctant to see him leave. "I should head back to town," she said. "I have another expectant mother due in a few days." "Long ride in the dark," Jack observed. "And cold." "I am used to it." She pulled on her gloves and adjusted her scarf. "Thank you again for what you did today." "I will ride with you," Jack said. "Make sure you get there safely." Nora started to protest that she had made this ride dozens of times alone. But something in his expression stopped her. It was not condescension or doubt in her ability. It was simply an offer, made plainly, and she found she wanted to accept it. "All right," she said. "Thank you." They set out into the cold night, their horses picking their way carefully down the mountain trail. The moon was bright enough to see by, and the world around them was silent except for the crunch of snow under hooves and the distant call of an owl. "How did you become a midwife?" Jack asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. "My mother was one," Nora said. "In Ohio, before we came west. I learned from her, just like you learned from yours." She paused, memories rising. "She died of cholera when I was 19, during the crossing. We were on a wagon train, and half the people died before we reached California. I tried to use what she had taught me to help them, but it was not enough." "I am sorry," Jack said, and there was genuine feeling in his voice. "It was 3 years ago. My father and I settled in Calistoga because he wanted to try farming, but he died that first winter. So I have been on my own since then, delivering babies and treating what illnesses I can. That is a hard life for anyone, let alone a young woman alone." Nora bristled slightly. "I managed just fine." "Did not say you did not," Jack said mildly. "Just said it was hard. Hard things can still be managed." She relaxed. "What about you? Why do you live alone in the mountains?" Jack was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Had a family once, a wife and a son. They died of fever 7 years ago when I was 26. After that, I could not stand being around people anymore. Came up into these mountains and just stayed." Nora felt her heart constrict with sympathy. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was. But time passes, and you learn to live with grief. The mountains are good for that. They do not ask anything of you except to survive. And some days, that is all I can manage." They rode on, and Nora found herself wanting to know more about this man, about his life in the wilderness, about the woman he had loved and lost. But she sensed that he had shared all he was willing to for now. So she let the silence settle between them again, comfortable rather than awkward. When they reached Calistoga, the small town was mostly dark, just a few lights burning in windows. Nora's home was a small cottage on the edge of town, next to the building where she saw patients. Jack rode with her all the way there, waiting while she dismounted and tended to her horse. Thank you for the escort, she said, turning to face him. In the moonlight, he looked even larger, almost mythical, this mountain man on his huge horse. Will I see you in town tomorrow? Probably. Need to stock up on a few things. He hesitated. If you want, I can bring some of those herbs I told you about. Show you more about how to prepare them. I would like that very much, Nora said, and she meant it. I usually work during the day, but I am free in the evenings. Evening then, I will come by. He touched his hand to his hat in a gesture that was oddly formal coming from him, then turned his horse and rode off into the darkness. Nora stood watching him go, her breath making clouds in the cold air, and wondered at the strange feeling in her chest. It had been a long time since she had felt anything beyond exhaustion and determination. But something about Jack Thompson had stirred something in her, something she had thought buried with all her other losses. The next evening, Jack appeared at her door just as the sun was setting, his arms full of pouches and bundles. Nora invited him in, clearing space on her large wooden table where she usually prepared medicines. For 2 hours, he taught her about mountain remedies, about plants she had never heard of, and techniques the Miwok had used for generations. His hands moved with confidence as he showed her how to prepare poultices and tinctures. And Nora found herself fascinated not just by the knowledge, but by him. You have a gift for this, she said at one point. You could be a healer yourself if you wanted. Jack shook his head. I am better with plants and animals than people. You, though, you have a way about you. The way you were with Sarah yesterday. You cared about saving her more than anything else. That matters more than any technique. You cared too, Nora pointed out. You worked just as hard as I did. Maybe, Jack admitted, but I am out of practice with caring about much of anything. Nora set down the herbs she was grinding and looked at him directly. I do not believe that. If you did not care, you would not have gone to check on the Whitfields. You would not be here teaching me right now. Jack met her gaze, those gray eyes intense and searching. Maybe you are right, he said softly. Maybe I am remembering how to care again. The air between them felt charged suddenly, full of something unspoken but powerful. Nora felt her pulse quicken, felt herself drawn to this man in ways she had not expected and did not entirely understand. She forced herself to look away, to focus on the herbs in front of her. Tell me about this one, she said, pointing to a dried root he had brought. Jack cleared his throat and launched into an explanation, and the moment passed. But Nora could still feel its echo humming through her. Over the next week, Jack came by every evening, and each time he taught her something new. But they also talked. Long conversations that ranged from medicine to the mountains, to their pasts and their losses. Nora learned that Jack had been a farmer before tragedy struck, that he had loved his wife deeply and had thought he would die himself when she and their son were taken by fever. I wanted to die, he admitted one night, his voice rough. For months, I wished I had gotten sick too. But I did not, and eventually I realized I had to choose whether to keep living or just give up. Coming to the mountains was my way of choosing to live, even if it was alone. I understand that, Nora said. After my parents died, I threw myself into my work because it was the only thing that made me feel alive. Bringing babies into the world, helping mothers survive, it reminded me that life continues even after loss. You are strong, Jack said, and there was admiration in his voice. Stronger than you probably realize. So are you, Nora replied. It takes strength to survive what you survived and to keep going. He looked at her for a long moment, and Nora felt that pull again, that magnetic attraction that seemed to grow stronger every time they were together. She wondered if he felt it too, if beneath his rough exterior and his grief there was room for something new. On Jack's last night in town before he planned to return to the mountains, they worked late into the evening. When they finally finished, Jack began packing up his supplies, moving slowly as if reluctant to leave. "I could come back down in a few weeks," he said, not quite looking at her. "Bring you more herbs, teach you some other things." "I would like that," Nora said, her heart lifting. "Or I could ride up to your place sometime, if you would not mind the company." Jack turned to her then, his eyes searching her face. "I would not mind," he said. "In fact, I would like it. Very much." They stood facing each other, and Nora felt the air thicken between them again. She took a step closer, hardly aware she was doing it, drawn by something beyond rational thought. "Nora," Jack said, his voice dropping lower, "I should tell you, I have not felt anything for anyone since my wife died. Did not think I could anymore. But with you, I feel something, and it scares me because I do not know if I can survive losing someone again." Nora reached out and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palm, the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I am scared too," she admitted. "I have been alone for so long, and I convinced myself that was easier. But then you appeared, and everything changed." Jack covered her hand with his own, those large, scarred fingers gentle against her skin. "I do not want to leave tomorrow," he said. "I want to stay here with you." "Then stay," Nora said, "or let me come with you. I do not care which. I just know I do not want to say goodbye. You have a life here, patients who need you. And you have a life in the mountains. But maybe we can find a way to have both." She looked up at him, at this massive man who had somehow worked his way into her heart in just 1 week. "I know this is fast, and maybe it is foolish, but I do not want to lose this. Lose you." Jack cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle despite his size and strength. "You are not foolish. You are brave. And I do not want to lose you either." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home to a place Nora had never known existed. His lips were warm and sure against hers, the kiss both tender and hungry, and she responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as she pressed against him. She felt the solid strength of his body, the power in his muscles, and it made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her parents died. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me," he said. "Come see where I live. If you hate it, I will understand. But at least see it before you decide anything." "When?" Nora asked. "Tomorrow. We can leave at dawn." Nora thought of her patients, of her responsibilities, but then she thought of spending more time with Jack, of exploring these feelings that had grown so strong so quickly. "All right," she said. "I will leave word with Mrs. Chen that I will be gone for a few days. She can handle any emergencies until I return." Jack smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and lighter. "You will not regret this," he said. "I promise." They left before dawn, riding through the cold morning with packs full of supplies. The journey took most of the day, climbing higher and higher into the mountains until they were surrounded by towering pines and peaks still capped with snow. Nora had never been this far into the wilderness, and she found it both beautiful and intimidating. Jack's cabin appeared just as the sun was beginning to set, nestled in a small valley with a stream running nearby. It was larger than Nora had expected, solidly built of logs, with a stone chimney and a small barn for his horse and the mule that carried his furs when he went to trade. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. There was a large main room with a fireplace, a sleeping loft above, and a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. Furs covered the floor and the walls, and everything was neat and organized in a way that spoke of a man who took care of his space. "It is wonderful," Nora said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "I expected something much more primitive." "I have been here 7 years," Jack said, building up the fire. "Had time to make it comfortable, and I like working with wood. Gives me something to do in the winter when trapping is slow." That evening, Jack cooked dinner over the fire, venison stew with wild onions and herbs, and they ate while sitting on furs in front of the hearth. The warmth and the food and the companionship all combined to make Nora feel more relaxed than she had in years. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "I can see why you love it." "It is peaceful," Jack agreed, "but it can also be lonely. I did not realize how lonely until I met you." They talked late into the night, and when exhaustion finally claimed them, Jack gave Nora the sleeping loft while he took furs by the fire. She protested, but he was firm. "You are my guest," he said, "and I want you to be comfortable." Over the next 3 days, Jack showed Nora his world. He took her to see his trap lines, taught her how to read animal tracks in the snow, showed her the places where the best medicinal plants grew. They hiked to a high ridge where they could see for miles in every direction, nothing but mountains and forest and sky. "This is freedom," Jack said, standing beside her on that ridge, the wind whipping through his long hair. "This is why I stayed." Nora understood. There was something about this wild place that called to a part of her she had not known existed, a part that yearned for open spaces and solitude and the raw beauty of nature. But she also knew that what made it truly special was sharing it with Jack, experiencing it through his eyes and his passion for this life he had built. On the 3rd night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Jack reached out and took her hand. "I know you have to go back tomorrow," he said. "But I have to tell you, these last few days have been the happiest I have been in 7 years. You fit here, Nora. You fit with me, and I do not want to let you go." Nora squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I do not want to go, but my patients need me, and I cannot just abandon them." "I know, and I would not ask you to." Jack took a deep breath. "But what if we found a way to make this work? What if I spent more time in Calistoga and you spent more time here? We could split our time between both places." "You would do that? Leave your mountains?" "For you, yes." Jack turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense with emotion. "I love you, Nora. I know it is fast, and maybe it is crazy, but it is true. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that she did not try to hide. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into that cabin and saved Sarah's life. You are the most extraordinary man I have ever met. And yes, I want to build a life with you." Jack pulled her into his arms, and they kissed with the fire crackling beside them and the wind howling outside. And Nora knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. They returned to Calistoga the next day. But this time, it was with plans and promises. Jack would spend 2 weeks of every month in town, helping Nora with her work and learning more about medicine. The other 2 weeks they would spend at the cabin, where Nora would learn more about mountain living and the herbs that grew wild in the high country. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it suited them both perfectly. Over the next months, they fell into a rhythm. In Calistoga, Jack used his strength and skills to help Nora in ways she had never had help before. He built her a larger workspace, constructed shelves for her medicines, and accompanied her on difficult calls where his presence and his knowledge often made the difference between life and death. Word spread about the mountain man who worked with the midwife, and some people were skeptical at first. But after Jack helped save a child who had fallen through ice, using techniques he had learned from the Miwok to warm the boy's body without causing shock, and after he successfully treated a logger's infected wound with a poultice that prevented the need for amputation, people began to accept and even respect him. In the mountains, Nora learned to shoot, to trap, to identify dozens of plants and their uses. She grew stronger and more confident in the wilderness, and she found that she loved the time they spent there, just the two of them against the elements. 6 months after they met, on a clear spring day with wildflowers blooming across the mountain meadows, Jack asked Nora to marry him. He did it simply, without elaborate words, just took her hand and said, "Will you be my wife? Will you share this life with me, mountains and town and everything between?" "Yes," Nora said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in Calistoga by the local minister, with half the town in attendance. Sarah Whitfield was there with her husband and baby daughter, healthy and glowing, a living testament to what Nora and Jack could accomplish together. People brought food and gifts, and there was dancing in the street despite some of the more conservative folks grumbling about such frivolity. But Nora did not care about grumbling. She danced with her new husband, this massive mountain man who moved with surprising grace, and she felt more joy than she had ever thought possible after all the loss she had endured. Their wedding night was spent at the cabin, where Jack had spent weeks preparing for her arrival as his wife. He had built new furniture, including a proper bed to replace the simple pallet he had been using, and he had carved their initials into the beam above the door. "I want you to feel like this is your home too," he said as he showed her everything he had done. "Not just my place that you visit, but our home." Nora kissed him, her heart overflowing. "Anywhere you are is my home," she said. "But I love what you have done. I love you." Their lovemaking that night was tender and passionate, a joining of two people who had found each other against all odds. Jack was gentle despite his size and strength, attentive to Nora's needs and responses, and she found herself amazed at how perfectly they fit together. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in furs with the fire burning low, Jack held her close and whispered, "I never thought I would feel whole again after losing my first family. But you have made me whole, Nora. You have given me a reason to live beyond just surviving." "You have done the same for me," Nora whispered back. "You have shown me that it is possible to love again, to hope again. You have given me everything." Life settled into a beautiful pattern. They split their time between the mountains and Calistoga as they had planned, and Nora found that she loved both lives equally. In town, she delivered babies and treated the sick, with Jack always beside her, his knowledge and strength complementing her own skills perfectly. They became known as a team, the midwife and the mountain man, and people sought them out for all kinds of ailments and emergencies. In the mountains, they lived a simpler life, hunting and gathering and preparing for winter. Nora learned to tan hides and smoke meat, to read the weather and predict storms. Jack taught her everything he knew, patient and thorough, and she proved to be an excellent student. A year after their wedding, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. memories of difficult births and maternal deaths flooding her mind. But Jack held her and said, "You are strong, and you know more about birthing than almost anyone, and I will be with you every step of the way. Our child will be fine, and so will you." His certainty helped calm her fears, though she could not entirely banish them. As her pregnancy progressed, they decided to stay mostly in Calistoga, where Nora could rest more and where help would be readily available if something went wrong. Jack doted on her, treating her like precious glass despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her work. He took over the more physically demanding aspects of her job, lifting patients, carrying equipment, doing anything that required strength or stamina. "I am not an invalid," Nora said with exasperation one evening when Jack insisted on helping her up the steps to their home. "I know," Jack said, "but you are carrying our child, and I will not take any chances with either of you." His protectiveness touched her even as it sometimes frustrated her, and she knew it came from a place of deep love and also deep fear. He had lost a child before, and she understood that he was terrified of losing another. When her time came in late autumn, Nora's labor was long but not unusually difficult. Jack stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and murmuring encouragement. Mrs. Chen, who had become a friend and who had learned much from Nora over the years, attended the birth. But there were complications. The baby, a boy, was turned wrong, and though Mrs. Chen managed to shift him, the process was painful and slow. Hours passed, and Nora grew exhausted, her strength waning. "I cannot," she gasped at one point, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Jack said fiercely, gripping her hand. "You are the strongest person I know, and you can do this. Our son needs you. I need you. Do not give up." His words gave her the strength to push through the pain, to keep going even when she thought she had nothing left. Finally, after 18 hours of labor, their son was born, screaming and red-faced and perfect. But Nora began to hemorrhage, the blood flowing fast and heavy, just as it had with Sarah Whitfield. Mrs. Chen's face went pale, and she looked at Jack with fear in her eyes. Jack did not hesitate. He grabbed his pack where he always kept his medicines and began preparing the same mixture he had used on Sarah, his hands moving with swift efficiency even as his face was tight with terror. "You are not leaving me," he said to Nora as he worked. "Do you hear me? We just started our life together, and you are not leaving." Nora wanted to respond, but she felt herself fading, the world growing dim around the edges. She heard Jack's voice, as if from a great distance, heard him giving instructions to Mrs. Chen, felt his hands on her body, strong and sure. Mrs. Chen shook her head, her expression grim. "There is no hope," she whispered to Jack. "The bleeding. It is too much." But Jack kept working, kept applying the herbs and the pressure and everything he knew. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "There is hope. Hope lives in us, in what we know and what we can do together. Help me and we will save her." His certainty, his refusal to accept defeat, seemed to rally Mrs. Chen. She nodded and began following his instructions with renewed determination. Together, they worked over Nora, their combined knowledge and skill fighting against the hemorrhage that threatened to take her. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, but she could feel Jack's hand holding hers, could hear his voice telling her to stay, to fight, to live. And so she fought, clinging to life because he asked her to, because their son needed her, because she was not ready to leave this beautiful life they had built. Slowly, impossibly, the bleeding began to slow. The herbs did their work, The pressure applied in exactly the right places stemmed the flow, and Nora's breathing steadied. Color began to return to her cheeks, and her eyes fluttered open to find Jack's face above her, tears streaming down his bearded cheeks. "You stayed," he whispered. "Thank God you stayed." "You would not let me go," Nora said weakly, managing a small smile. "You are very stubborn." "When it comes to you, always," Jack said, and he kissed her forehead with infinite gentleness. Mrs. Chen placed their son in Nora's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face, at the perfect little features, and the dark hair so like his father's. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect," Jack agreed. "And so are you." They named him James, after Jack's father. And he proved to be a healthy, strong baby who rarely cried and seemed content wherever he was placed. Nora recovered slowly from the difficult birth, but with Jack caring for her with devoted attention, she regained her strength steadily. "You saved my life," she told him one evening as they sat together watching James sleep in the cradle Jack had carved from pine. "Just like you saved Sarah's. The midwife said there was no hope, but you refused to believe it." "Hope lived in us," Jack said. "In what we knew, in what we could do together. I was not going to let you go without fighting with everything I had." "I am glad you are stubborn," Nora said, leaning against his solid shoulder. "I am glad you fight." "Always," Jack promised. "For you, for James, for our family, I will always fight." They spent that winter in Calistoga, allowing Nora to fully recover and James to grow stronger before taking him to the mountain cabin. During those months, they continued their work together, though at a slower pace that accommodated the needs of their infant son. Jack proved to be a devoted father, as attentive and protective with James as he was with Nora. He carried the baby in a sling he fashioned from soft leather, keeping him close while working. And he woke for night feedings to bring James to Nora so she could nurse without having to rise. "You are going to spoil him," Nora teased, watching Jack play with their son, making silly faces that made James gurgle with baby laughter. "Good," Jack said unrepentantly. "He deserves to be spoiled. They both did, my first son and this one. I could not spoil Thomas, so I will spoil James enough for both of them." Nora's heart ached at the mention of Jack's first son, the child he had lost so young. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "About Thomas." Jack was quiet for a moment, then began to speak, his voice rough with old grief. "He was 3 when he died. Had his mother's eyes and my stubborn nature. Loved horses, wanted to be a rancher when he grew up." He paused, his large hand gentle on James's small head. "I used to think that loving another child would be betraying him. But now I realize that love does not replace love. James does not take Thomas's place. He has his own place in my heart, and there is room for both." Nora reached out and covered Jack's hand with her own. "Thomas would be glad to have a brother," she said, "even if they will never meet in this life." "I like to think so," Jack said. When spring came and the mountain passes cleared, they packed up and took James to the cabin. He was 4 months old by then, healthy and growing fast, and he seemed to thrive in the mountain air. Nora found that motherhood suited her, though it was more challenging than she had anticipated balancing it with her work. But Jack made it possible, taking on more than his share of childcare and household duties, never complaining when Nora needed to attend to a patient or work on medicines. They developed a new routine that included James in everything they did. When they gathered herbs, he came along in his sling. When they saw patients, he was there in his cradle, watching with wide, curious eyes. And at night, he slept between them, safe and warm and loved. 2 years passed in this way, years of work and love and growth. James learned to walk in the mountain meadows, his first steps taken between his parents as they both encouraged him. He learned to talk. His first word, Mama, followed quickly by Papa, and then a flood of other words as he discovered the joy of communication. Nora became pregnant again when James was 2.5, and this time she was less afraid, trusting in her body and in Jack's knowledge. Their second child, a daughter they named Julia after Nora's mother, was born in the mountain cabin on a clear summer day with Mrs. Chen in attendance. The birth was easier than James's had been, and though there was some bleeding afterward, it was nothing like the hemorrhage that had nearly killed Nora the first time. Jack was prepared regardless, his medicines ready, but they proved unnecessary. "See?" Nora said as she held Julia, exhausted but triumphant. "I told you this one would be easier." "You did," Jack agreed, relief evident in every line of his body. "And you were right. But I will never not be prepared. I will never take chances with you." Julia proved to be as different from James as possible. Where he had been quiet and content, she was loud and demanding. Where he had been easy to soothe, she wanted what she wanted when she wanted it. But she was also joyful and affectionate, quick to laugh and smile, and both parents fell completely in love with her. "She has your determination," Jack told Nora, bouncing Julia as she squawked with displeasure at having to wait for her feeding. "And your stubbornness," Nora countered, reaching for their daughter. "Poor thing has both our difficult qualities." "She will need them," Jack said. "The world is not easy for women. Better she be stubborn and determined than meek and compliant." Nora smiled at him, this man who had exceeded every expectation, who treated her as an equal partner and raised their daughter to be strong. "You are an extraordinary father," she said, "and an extraordinary man." "I am a man who knows his good fortune," Jack replied. "Everything I have, everything I am now, is because of you." Life continued its steady rhythm. They split their time between the mountains and Calistoga, their family growing in love and happiness. James proved to have his father's affinity for the wilderness, learning to track and hunt and survive with an aptitude that made Jack proud. Julia showed an interest in medicine, always wanting to watch when her mother prepared herbs or treated patients. When James was 6 and Julia was 3, Nora became pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and she spent much of it tired and uncomfortable. Jack worried constantly, hovering even more than usual, until Nora had to gently but firmly tell him to give her space. "I am fine," she said. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not made of glass." "I know," Jack said, "but you are precious to me, and I cannot help but worry." "Worry quietly, then," Nora said with a smile, "and trust that I know my own body." Their third child, another boy they named Joseph, after Jack's brother who had died young, was born without complication on a cold November day in Calistoga. He was smaller than his siblings had been, but healthy and strong-lunged, announcing his arrival with vigorous cries that made both parents laugh with relief. With 3 children, life became busier and more chaotic, but also fuller and richer. Jack built an addition onto the cabin to give everyone more space, and they spent more time in the mountains now that the children were old enough to truly enjoy it. They taught their children everything they knew. James and Julia learned about medicine and healing alongside tracking and wilderness survival. They learned to read and write, with Nora teaching them in the evenings by firelight. They learned the value of helping others, accompanying their parents on calls and seeing firsthand the difference their work made. The years passed swiftly, marked by the growth of their children and the deepening of the love between Nora and Jack. They faced challenges, as all families did. There were lean winters when game was scarce and money tight. There were illnesses that had them terrified, watching over fevered children through long nights. There were disagreements and frustrations, the inevitable friction of two strong-willed people sharing a life. But through it all, they held fast to each other and to the love that had brought them together. Jack never stopped being protective and devoted, never stopped making Nora feel cherished. And Nora never stopped pushing Jack to be his best self, to share his gifts with the world instead of hiding in the mountains. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Nora said one evening when they were alone, the children finally asleep after a long day. They were sitting outside the cabin, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "What?" Jack asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I think about that day at the Whitfield cabin, when I was sure Sarah was going to die and I felt so helpless. And then you walked in, this stranger who seemed to come from nowhere, and everything changed." She paused, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "It was not just that you saved Sarah. It was that you saved me too, in a way. You reminded me that I was not alone, that there was still hope and help and love in the world." Jack kissed the top of her head. "You saved me too," he said. "I was existing, not living. Going through motions, surviving, but not thriving. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain, to engage with the world again. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just getting through each day." "We saved each other then?" Nora said. "We did, and we have been saving each other ever since." They sat in comfortable silence, and Nora thought about all the lives they had saved together over the years, all the babies they had delivered, all the illnesses they had treated. But more than that, she thought about the life they had built, the family they had created, the love they shared. When James was 12, Julia 9, and Joseph 6, they were called to a difficult birth in a small homestead 2 days' ride from Calistoga. The mother was a young woman, barely 18, giving birth to her first child with only her terrified husband in attendance. They made the journey as a family, as they often did now that the children were old enough to help. When they arrived, they found the young woman in hard labor, the baby positioned wrong, and complications that made Nora's heart sink. She and Jack worked together, as they had so many times before. Their movements coordinated, their knowledge combined. The children helped in small ways, bringing water and clean cloths, keeping the husband calm with their steady presence. The labor was long and difficult, and there was a point where the young midwife who had been attending shook her head and whispered to the husband, "There is no hope. I am sorry, but I do not think either of them will make it." But Jack, hearing this, said firmly, "No, there is hope. Hope lives in what we know, in what we can do. As long as we do not give up, there is hope." He and Nora worked through the night, trying everything they knew, drawing on years of experience and learning. James, Julia, and Joseph watched their parents with wide eyes, seeing them fight for life with a determination that bordered on ferocity. Just before dawn, when everyone was exhausted and even Nora was beginning to despair, the baby shifted. With one more push, the child was born, a girl with a strong cry that filled the cabin. And the mother, though weak, survived, the bleeding controlled before it could become dangerous. The husband wept with joy and gratitude, and the young midwife stared at Nora and Jack with awe. "You did it," she said. "You saved them when I was sure they were lost." "Hope lived in them," Jack said, his hand finding Nora's. "Hope always lives when people refuse to give up." On the ride home, Julia asked her mother, "How did you and Papa know what to do? How did you know they would be all right?" "We did not know," Nora admitted. "But we believed it was possible, and we used everything we had learned to make it happen. That is what your father means when he says hope lives in us. It means we do not give up. We use our knowledge and our skill and our determination to fight for life." "Is that what Papa did when you were born?" Julia asked. "When you were bleeding and the midwife said there was no hope?" Nora glanced at Jack, seeing the memory of that terrifying day reflected in his eyes. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what he did. He refused to accept that I would die, and he fought to save me." "And I would do it again," Jack said, 1,000 times over. "Because hope lives in love, and I love your mother more than anything in this world." "Except us?" Joseph piped up, and everyone laughed. "Except you three," Jack agreed, reaching over to ruffle his youngest son's hair. "I love all of you more than anything." As their children grew older and more capable, Nora and Jack began to think about the future and what would happen when they were no longer able to do this work. James had expressed interest in becoming a doctor, wanting to take his knowledge further than what his parents could teach him. Julia wanted to be a midwife, like her mother, already showing a natural aptitude for the work. Joseph, still young, was still discovering his passions, but showed promise in all areas. "They will carry on what we have started," Nora said one evening. "They will help people just as we have." "They will do more than that," Jack said. "They will take what we have taught them and build on it, learn new things, help in ways we cannot imagine. That is how it should be." When James turned 16, they arranged for him to apprentice with a doctor in San Francisco, a man Nora had met at a medical conference and trusted. It was hard to let him go, harder than Nora had expected, but she knew it was necessary for his education and growth. Julia, at 13, began taking on more responsibilities in her mother's work, attending births with increasing independence and skill. She had her mother's steady hands and her father's unshakable calm, and patients quickly learned to trust her. Joseph, at 10, was still finding his way, but he showed talent with horses and animals that suggested he might have a different path than his siblings. Life continued to unfold in its beautiful, complicated way. Nora and Jack grew older, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experience and mutual respect. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked Jack one day as they sat together on the porch of the cabin, their hands intertwined. "Leaving the solitary life you had before we met? Taking on a family and all the complications that came with it?" Jack turned to her, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been that first day she met him. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You gave me a life worth living, Nora. You gave me purpose and joy and love. Everything before you is just shadow. You brought light." Tears stung Nora's eyes. "You brought light to me too," she said. "I was so lonely before you came, so tired of carrying everything alone. You made me stronger by sharing the burden. You made me happier by sharing the joy." They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices. Julia calling Joseph for dinner, the sound of laughter and life. "We have built something good here," Jack said. "Something that will last beyond us." "We have," Nora agreed. "Because we refused to give up. Because when everyone else said there was no hope, we believed differently." "Hope lives in us," Jack said, repeating the words he had spoken so many times over the years. It does, Nora said, squeezing his hand. It always has. When James returned from San Francisco 3 years later, he was a trained doctor with knowledge and skills that complemented what his parents had taught him. He set up practice in Calistoga, and soon the little town had a reputation for excellent medical care. People traveled from far and wide to see the doctor and the midwife, who worked together just as their parents did. Julia married at 22, a good man named Daniel Shaw, who shared her passion for helping others. They continued to work alongside Nora, with Julia taking on more and more of the midwifery duties as Nora aged and found the physical demands more challenging. Joseph, to everyone's surprise, became a veterinarian, studying under a traveling animal doctor and then setting up his own practice treating the horses and cattle and other animals that were so vital to frontier life. Jack and Nora watched their children flourish with deep satisfaction, knowing that they had raised them well, had passed on not just knowledge, but values and character. "We did good," Jack said one evening when they had gathered all together for dinner, their children and their children's spouses and the grandchildren that were beginning to arrive. "We did," Nora agreed, watching Julia hold her newborn daughter, watching James examine Joseph's son's scraped knee with gentle attention. "We created a legacy." As they grew older still, Jack and Nora spent more time at the mountain cabin and less in town, letting their children take over most of the medical work. But they were still called for difficult cases, still consulted when someone needed their particular expertise. On a crisp autumn day, when Nora was 55 and Jack was 62, they took a long walk through the mountain meadows they had walked together so many times before. The aspen trees were golden, the air was clear and cold, and everything was exactly as it had been for decades. "Do you remember the first time we walked here?" Nora asked, her hand in Jack's as they strolled slowly along the familiar path. "I remember," Jack said. "You were fascinated by everything, asking 1,000 questions about plants and animals. I thought you were the most alive person I had ever met." "I thought you were like something out of a legend," Nora said with a laugh. "This huge mountain man who appeared exactly when he was needed. I was a little bit afraid of you and completely fascinated by you all at once." "And now?" Jack asked, teasing. "Now you are just mine," Nora said. "My husband, my partner, my love. The man I have spent more than 30 years with and still want to spend every day with." Jack stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you," he said, his voice still deep and rough, but softened by age. "I have loved you from almost the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And beyond that," Nora said, her arms around him, her head against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat, still strong and steady. "Love does not end with death. It continues, just like hope continues. That is what you taught me." They stood there together in the golden afternoon light, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of meaning and love and purpose. Years continued to pass, and eventually age caught up with them as it catches up with everyone. Jack's strength waned, though he remained formidable even in his 70s. Nora's hands grew less steady, though her mind remained sharp and her knowledge vast. They spent most of their time at the cabin now, with their children and grandchildren visiting regularly. The cabin had been expanded multiple times over the years and was now a sprawling complex that could accommodate the entire family when they gathered for holidays and celebrations. On a summer evening, when Nora was 68 and Jack was 75, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before. Jack had been slowing down lately, his breathing sometimes labored, his movements more careful. But he was still Jack, still strong and solid and steady. "I have been thinking," he said, his hand holding hers. "About what?" Nora asked. "About how lucky I have been. About how I got a second chance at love and family when I thought that part of my life was over. About how you gave me everything." Nora squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and scars, the strength still present even if diminished. "We gave each other everything," she said. "I need you to promise me something," Jack said. And there was something in his voice that made Nora turn to look at him fully. "What?" "When I am gone, and I know that day is not far off, I need you to keep going. Keep helping people. Keep living fully. Do not retreat into grief the way I did after my first wife died." "Jack, promise me," he insisted. "You have so much to offer still, so much good you can do, and our children and grandchildren need you. Promise you will keep going." Tears filled Nora's eyes. "I promise," she whispered. "But you are not leaving me anytime soon. You are too stubborn for that." Jack smiled, that rare, full smile that she loved so much. "Maybe. But when I do, remember that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Remember that you saved me in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved me," Nora said. When the midwife shook her head and said there was no hope, you held my hand and said hope lived in us. You have been proving that every day since. That night, as they lay together in the bed Jack had built decades ago, he held her close and whispered, "I love you, Nora Brighton Thompson. Forever and always." "Forever and always," Nora whispered back. And they fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for more than 30 years. Jack died peacefully 3 days later, in his sleep, with Nora beside him. He simply did not wake up one morning, his heart having finally given out after 75 years of hard living and deep loving. Nora's grief was profound, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to imagine going on. But she remembered her promise, and she remembered everything Jack had taught her about hope and perseverance and fighting even when the odds seemed impossible. Their children surrounded her with love and support, and slowly, painfully, she began to heal. She continued her work, though at a much reduced pace, consulting on difficult cases and teaching Julia and James everything she still had to share. She lived at the mountain cabin most of the time now, finding comfort in the place where she and Jack had been happiest. She took daily walks through the meadows they had walked together, talking to him as if he were still beside her, telling him about their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the lives being saved using the knowledge they had shared. On the anniversary of Jack's death, Nora made the journey to Calistoga, where he was buried in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. She sat beside his grave and told him everything she had been too grief-stricken to say at his funeral. "You were right, you know," she said to the carved stone that bore his name. Hope did live in us. It lived in our knowledge and our determination and our love. It lived in the way we refused to give up, the way we fought for life and for each other. And it still lives, Jack. It lives in our children and our grandchildren. It lives in every life we saved together, every baby we delivered, every person we helped. She traced his name with her fingers, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I miss you every single day, but I am keeping my promise. I am still going, still helping, still living, because that is what you would want. Because that is what we built together, a legacy of hope." Nora lived for another 12 years after Jack died, reaching the age of 80 before her own heart finally gave out. In those years, she saw her family continue to grow and thrive, saw her children become grandparents themselves, saw the work she and Jack had started spread far beyond what they had ever imagined. Julia became renowned as one of the finest midwives in California, traveling to teach other women her techniques and her mother's knowledge. James's medical practice grew to include 2 other doctors, and he published papers on frontier medicine that were read across the country. Joseph's veterinary practice thrived, and he developed new treatments for animal diseases that saved countless livestock and helped frontier families survive. On her deathbed, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Nora smiled despite her weakness. "Your father and I started with nothing but determination and love," she told them. "And look what we built. Look what you are all still building." "We learned from the best," Julia said, holding her mother's hand. "Tell me again," Joseph said, "about the day Papa walked into the Whitfield cabin and saved that woman's life. About how you met." Nora's eyes grew distant with memory. "It was a winter night, and I was sure Sarah Whitfield was going to die. I was exhausted and frightened and felt so alone. And then this enormous man walked in out of the snow, like something from a fairy tale, and he had this quiet confidence that made me believe everything would be all right." "And it was," James said, "because Papa refused to give up." "He did," Nora agreed. "When I wanted to quit, he kept fighting. When the bleeding started with me after you were born, when the midwife shook her head and said there was no hope, your father held my hand and said hope lived in us. And he was right. It always has." Her breathing grew shallower, and her children leaned in close. "Remember that," Nora whispered. "Hope lives in knowledge and determination and love. It lives in refusing to give up. It lives in fighting for life with everything you have. Your father taught me that, and we taught you, and now you must teach your children. That is our legacy. That is what we built." Those were Nora's last coherent words. She slipped into unconsciousness shortly after, and died peacefully a few hours later, surrounded by the love that had defined her life. She was buried beside Jack on the hill overlooking Calistoga, and the entire town turned out for her funeral, along with countless people from across the territory who had been helped by her over the decades. They told stories of babies delivered in impossible circumstances, of illnesses cured when all seemed lost, of the midwife and the mountain man who had worked together to bring hope to the frontier. Years turned into decades, and the Thompson family continued to grow and thrive. Julia's daughter became a doctor, combining her grandmother's midwifery knowledge with her uncle's medical training. James's son opened a hospital in Sacramento. Joseph's children continued the veterinary practice and expanded it to include wildlife conservation. The cabin in the mountains remained in the family, a place where generations gathered to remember and celebrate. The story of Jack and Nora was passed down, becoming almost mythical in its retelling, but always holding at its core the same essential truth: that hope lives in people who refuse to give up, in knowledge shared and used to help others, in love that persists through loss and hardship. And in a small museum in Calistoga, there is a display dedicated to Jack and Nora Thompson, the mountain man and the midwife who brought modern medicine to the frontier. There are Jack's herb pouches and the carved wooden tools he made, Nora's medical instruments, and the journals where she recorded every birth she attended. There are photographs of them: Jack tall and powerful even in old age, Nora small but formidable beside him. But the centerpiece of the display is a simple wooden plaque that was found hanging in their cabin after Nora died. On it, carved in Jack's careful hand, are the words that defined their life together. The midwife shook her head and said no hope. The mountain man held her hand and said hope lived in them. And it did, and it does, And it always will, as long as people refuse to give up, as long as they fight for life with everything they have, as long as they love fiercely and completely. Hope lives in us all. That plaque hangs in the museum still, a reminder of two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. It is a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when death seems certain and circumstances seem impossible, hope can survive and even thrive if people are willing to fight for it. And in the mountains above Calistoga, in the meadows where Jack and Nora walked together for so many years, wildflowers still bloom every spring, golden and beautiful, persistent and strong, a living testament to the power of hope and love and the refusal to give up. The cabin still stands, maintained by generations of Thompsons who return there to remember, to celebrate, and to teach their children about the extraordinary, ordinary people who started it all. Because in the end, that is what Jack and Nora were. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things, not through superhuman ability, but through knowledge, determination, and love. They were a mountain man and a midwife who met by chance on a winter night and chose to face life together, building a legacy that would outlast them by generations. They proved that hope lives not in miracles or magic, but in the everyday choices people make to keep fighting, to keep learning, to keep loving even when it seems impossible. Hope lived in them, and through them it spread to countless others, a ripple effect that continued long after they were gone. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy anyone can leave. Not wealth or fame or monuments, but the simple truth that hope lives in us, in our actions and our choices, and our refusal to give up on life and on each other. Jack and Nora understood that, lived it every day, and passed it on to all who came after them. Their story, which began with blood and fear and a stranger walking through a door at exactly the right moment, ended with love and family and a community transformed by their example. It is a story of the American frontier, of hardship overcome and lives saved. But more than that, it is a story of hope itself, of its power to sustain and transform and create beauty even in the harshest circumstances. And so the story of Jack Thompson and Nora Brighton. Thompson endures, passed down through generations, a reminder that hope lives in us all, waiting to be discovered and shared, as powerful and persistent as love itself, as necessary and life-giving as breath. They found it in each other on a cold winter night in 1878, and they spent the rest of their lives proving its truth, showing that when people refuse to give up, when they combine their knowledge and their strength and their love, anything is possible. Hope lived in them. It lived in their children. It lives still in all who remember their story and take its lessons to heart. And it will continue to live, as long as people remember that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, hope survives in those who refuse to let it die, in those who hold each other's hands and say together with absolute certainty that hope lives in us, and it always will.